Hello, Widowhood. Our guest today is Coach Britt. Her holistic coaching is the cornerstone of her approach to addressing the entirety of an individual mind, body, emotions, social interactions, and spirituality. She holds a bachelor's degree in human resource management and is presently pursuing her master's degree at Capella University to become a licensed clinical mental health counselor. Her specialization in life coaching and business consulting aligns seamlessly with both her academic background and personal journey, while advancing her education to extend support to individuals who have sought therapy without finding it suitable or where they require different approach to meet their healing needs. Having triumphantly over experiences of sexual assault and domestic violence. She is an advocate for embracing healing and reclaiming personal narratives, recognizing that connection and effort are key components of the healing process. Her dedication lies in empowering survivors and fostering hope in their journey to recovery. I want you to know that if you reach out to Coach Britt, she has a special discount code for our audience, which is code TINA 2024. And with that code, TINA 2024, when you buy 3 sessions, you will get one free. There will be additional details in the show notes and the comments. Let's get into the discussion now.
Many people talk about the ups and downs of married life, but no one really prepares you for life after your spouse passes away. Welcome to Widowhood Real Talk with Tina, a safe place for widows, widowers, and their friends and family to talk about love and loss. Find comfort as you listen to honest conversations between Tina and invited guests who've experienced the loss of their forever partner. Share their stories of love, grief, and healing. You are not alone in this journey. Join today's episode and discover a wealth of resources and learn how to connect with others who are traveling the same path. This is Widowhood Real Talk with Tina.
Coach Britt, welcome to the Widowhood.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You know, you bring such a dynamic perspective to this conversation because someone sees the word coach, but that's not
Mhm.
the whole story. And I love the word holistic is in there. Soon I'm doing life coach in there. So tell me what they don't see when they see the word coach Britt there.
I think a lot of people don't see my education because unfortunately, life coaches are a dime a dozen at this point, and most of them don't have legitimate education to back it up. I
Hmm.
believe they have a lot of life experience, but to be a life coach is not regulated like to be a mental health counselor.
Okay.
So any old person can do it, or they can say you can pay $20 and become a certified life coach. So
Let me
I
just say that's not what I did, but go ahead.
no, for sure. But I get that a lot. I get a lot of
Right.
negative, oh, you're a life coach, you don't know anything. And it's like, okay, that's fine. You're welcome to your opinion. But until you get to an educated background of me, um, think what you want. Like I'm not here. It doesn't make me lose sleep at night. So I think that's the biggest part. I am in school. I graduate next year with my master's in clinical mental health counseling. So I think the important thing when working with me is there is a lot of education to back it up. There is a lot of life experience to back it up. And the biggest difference, I think, between what I can do now as a life coach versus when I become a licensed therapist is that it's a little bit more heart to heart. It's one on one. Because once I become licensed, if I'm working in a therapeutic setting, there's a little bit more red tape. So I like the life coaching aspect because I get to just be a human sitting across from another human. If I want to disclose a little bit, I can. If it's pertinent. So this is the arena I'm in right now, and it's also consulting. So that's the other side of what I do. I have a HR degree, and so for 23 years I ran businesses, and so I do consulting and team trainings and team leadership, staff retreats, leadership training. I do public speaking events. So there's a rounded side to me. It's not just the coaching side.
Thank you for explaining that because I think that is extremely important because people that are listening to this conversation, the reason why I talk to different therapists or different coaches, because people may have that education, they may have that background, but it's oftentimes It's who someone feels like they connect. It's
Absolutely.
all those documents and everything else is going to be when I hear that conversation and I feel like that person can understand my journey, that
Mhm.
they can resonate with the struggles and what I have endured and where I am. So when someone comes to speak with you as far as a life coach, you talked about personal experience. What type of that personal experience are you bringing to that coaching session?
Well, there's various aspects of the coaching that I do. I'd say there's two distinct sides. There's the mental health side and there's the business side. Some of the clients come to me and they say, "Hey, can we review my resume? I have a big job interview coming up. Can you help me prepare for this? Can we do some mock interviews?" So that might be like 2 to 4 appointments, and then they're done. And then the mental health side of it, I work a lot with like domestic violence survivors, sexual assault survivors, just anxiety, depression, just your generalized mental health. So I don't do diagnosis as a life coach because that's illegal. It's outside of my scope. If somebody has really severe trauma work that they need to do, I can work with them and I will, only with the caveat that they are also in therapy because I have ethics and there's a scope of practice that I won't touch until I'm licensed. And anybody can tell you they're trauma informed. Your dentist is trauma informed because they have to be. That just simply means they understand people sitting in front of you have all experienced trauma. And here's some signs. It doesn't mean they're qualified to work with your trauma. And I'm very passionate about that. So I work a lot with clients in conjunction with a therapist. And if that's the case, then I say, let me know what you guys are doing. Let me in on your homework. How can I support you with the trauma dumping? Like, I'm here to help process when you need a little extra in between the therapist. I'm here to help with the coping skills, understanding triggers, giving additional psychoeducation. So all of that's within the realm that I can do, and it is backed up with education. And you're going to hear me say that a lot because there's a lot of bunked life coaches out there that you shouldn't be working with.
Say it again louder for the people in the back.
There's a lot of crappy coaches claiming to help you, and you should not be working with most of them. I will say it bluntly, and I don't care if it brings hate.
No, and also I agree with that
Mhm.
because circling back to something that you mentioned that I don't think people really have the breadth of understanding. When you
Mhm.
talk about the scope and ethics in which you will work with someone and
Yeah.
someone needing particularly a therapist versus
Mhm.
a coach and thinking they are the blended the same. I
Mhm.
just had a discovery discussion with someone today. I can easily see in that conversation they are not in a coaching space, that they need a therapist. They need a mental health professional to work with them
Mhm.
and versus what I would be able to give for them.
Mhm.
People are driven by different things that make them show up in lives of people, but the people that you're supporting are very vulnerable and they should be protected instead of taken advantage of.
And to that end, a lot of life coaches are motivated by money. Now, there is no legal regulation around life coaching, and they can charge you whatever they want. And on my website, I'm very blunt about it. If they are charging you more than somebody with a PhD would, why would you be going to them?
The
Now, everybody
glitter,
has different bets.
the presentation, the advertisement, the hype, and then it
Yeah.
gets down to so look, I could go down that road. I'm gonna reel myself back in.
Mhm, mhm.
And
Well,
so
can I say one more thing?
this is
I
your yes.
Well, two things that I want to say actually about this topic. One is that I work in mental health during the day. I run psychosocial rehabilitation groups. I work in the field of mental health right now, even though I'm not licensed. And I have since for like 3 years now, been actively in the mental health world. And I co work with therapists. So the groups that I run right now are primarily mental health, but it's secondary high co-occurring substance use disorder. So that's what I do right now. I work with the Medicaid population. I work a lot with non-white populations, partially just because I'm in Florida. And the other component is that if you do want to work with a coach, you need to do your research. That's all I recommend. What is their background? A lot of these people don't even have legitimate websites, can't even verify if they have a legitimate business. You don't know what their trainings are. Like when I come across these coaches on TikTok and other apps, I see what their link tree says. And when I click on them, I can't tell you how many say buy me a coffee. Why are my potential clients going to buy me a coffee? It's gross.
You
So
have
I
seen
just say do your research.
wow. So
Mhm.
I am interacting with people like-minded, so I haven't debunked the rest that's out there to have that perspective. Now you
Yeah.
have me intrigued
I
to
click
go.
on it when it
it,
pops up on my feed.
okay.
I want to see if you're legit or not. And that's the thing, do your research
Yes.
and ask some important questions. And if you have somebody that's in a life coach field telling you a diagnosis, run.
Oh
They
yeah,
are way
that's
out
not
of
their lane.
their ethical and legal realm, but there's not laws backing this up. The other thing I think is important is, even though I have this mental health education, I have a bachelor's degree in human resources management. That's where all of that experience comes from. I also, the coaching certifications that I went through, the courses that I take and I continue to take to add to my knowledge is
Yes.
presented by a PhD psychologist that understands the difference between coaching and therapy.
Right.
So a lot of that is inside of the informed consent. So if a coach hears this and they're pissed at me for outing them, I don't care, because I care about human beings and I care
Yes.
about mental health and I care about you healing correctly, not about the coolest person on TikTok that has 400,000 followers and has no legitimate website, no legitimate background. I mean, there's people on there that their business names include the word counseling, and you have to find the tiny little paragraph at the darkest part of their page, or if they happen to have a website that says, I am not a licensed mental health counselor. It's
That
slimy.
is
So there's a lot of cool, showy
wow.
people, but are they the best suited to help you? Not always. And it doesn't mean that some of them aren't, because I know some wonderful life coaches that are legit with ethics that do some amazing work and have done tons of training. But that's the research you have to do when you're looking to work with a coach. So I don't knock it on principle, but there's a
Correct.
lot of crappy ones out there. And there's a lot of crappy therapists. Let me also say that.
I was going to say that you could go down that line too, but I want to circle back to something that you mentioned
Mhm.
about two different sides in which you support people.
Yeah.
Because my audience sometimes are people that are having to re-enter the workforce because of the change of their life structure, their
Mhm.
partner transitioning from this world, and
Yeah.
their economic status is different. There are people, you mentioned a resume and having to prep for a job interview. Literally, people are sick to their stomach because
Yeah.
that's something that they now need to do under the most stressful moments of their life.
Right.
What would that look like? And how would they benefit from working with you for that particular service?
First of all, I think it's holding space for the grief while you're trying to continue on with your life. That would always be addressed, especially in these circumstances. Say you referred somebody to me. So there would be some additional work with that. I think there's a tremendous amount of confidence boosting. And that's where the prep work would really come in handy, especially if these people have been out of the workforce for 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years and they're like, no one's going to hire me. That's not true, but let's do some prep. So it's making a resume, it's learning how to speak to the absence that you've been living in, from the career field. Well, you don't want to say too much, but you want to say enough so that they understand the picture. And then it talks about then we teach how to verbalize the value I can bring to your company. These are my skills. And you learn, and putting it on a resume, but then also giving them that confidence to not cower at an interview, because they feel so insecure about it.
Thank
That'd probably
you.
be the shortest answer. Yeah.
No, 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 that's great. I mean, you can't give them everything, but I
Right.
want them to get a
Mhm.
grasp of how they would benefit.
Mhm.
Because there's one thing from going online and obtaining a template on how to write a resume and doing a practice dry run with your cousin
Mhm.
who doesn't really know much, than working with someone that has an HR background. And I just want to dive in. That stands for human resource. I
Mhm.
don't want to make an assumption anyone understands acronyms. And the
Sure.
human resource person is
Mhm.
the part of the company that is dealing with the hiring of
And
people.
recruiting. Mhm.
Exactly. So having somebody such as yourself to work with you to help build your resume, you're getting the inside scoop on what someone would ideally be looking for and help empower you to be
Yes.
successful.
Yes. And not only that, but I think also now that I'm thinking about this, like another huge component of that would be the laws. what they're not allowed to ask you, reviewing that, because it's going to look
Yes.
different from somebody who hasn't been in the workforce for years, you know. So I think that that's important also, like learning how to speak to it. Like they can't ask you specific questions. So it's also familiarizing them with that. But that's what I did for 23 years before I shifted to mental health. So it was hiring, it was firing, it was building teams, it was creating HR manuals, teaching business owners the laws, because so many of them
Right.
don't. Like, you can't ask that question in an interview. You basically have to hire that person now. So
Yes.
it's confidence building, but also understanding healthy boundaries and what is allowed legally, because that is a massive component.
And that is
That
important. So
yes.
just a bit of a tease that so as I'm speaking about people working with you for that component of your services,
Mhm.
do people have to be local? Is there a particular
No.
region that's limited to how they can engage you from any place per se?
Yes. So I don't have an office setting and I don't intend on getting one until I am a licensed counselor, but
Okay.
I will still continue to do coaching because they have different goals and they have different qualities. So if I work with somebody, it's more about putting them in the right informed consent bracket. So if I'm working with you as a coach, you have to understand I'm not going to diagnose, I'm not going to do these things, but we can do different things. So that's why I have a discovery call myself is, do I have what you need? Do I want to work with you? Do you want to work with me? Because I don't want to work with everybody. And I have no problem saying that. I don't
Same.
want to be for everybody, because then I feel like if I appease everybody and appeal to everybody, I'm probably not being my authentic self. And I
Mm,
have no problem with boundaries. I teach those all day, every day. So, but I think it's important to have a discovery call, including even when you're looking for a therapist. And sometimes people will get referred to me just because they need help finding those resources. And so it's like one appointment because you don't know what you don't know. And so working in the mental health field, doesn't matter if I live in Florida and you live in Colorado, I have resources to figure out how to get you help. Give me your insurance. We can find this, take off some of that stress and burden. Because sometimes people are in, freeze and they're in flight and they've got trauma and their depression takes hold or whatever. And asking them to do a simple task like looking something up online can sometimes be very overwhelming. So that helps too.
I can definitely relate to that.
Mhm.
When one of the other things that you mentioned that becomes very difficult for people that are grieving their spouse, if they
Yeah.
were in a domestic violence
Yeah.
situation
Yeah.
and they're having to come to terms with the reality of the relationship they were in with their partner and the relief, the
Mhm.
idea that they are no longer in that particular space. If someone came to you with that particular scenario, and I know you can't give everybody an answer, but someone that's looking to come to terms with that, how would you guide them in reconciling that?
First and foremost, I'm going to be a person sitting across from you. And I think that people underestimate the value of being heard and listened to. I think it's important in those situations to help them understand what's going on in their brain, what happened to their brain from suffering that type of abuse. So psychoeducation is tremendous. A lot of women that will say to me, I think I need to be tested for ADHD. And I'm like, maybe, but talk to me about your trauma history. Oh, you don't have resolved trauma and you have this and this and this. Well, let me tell you what happens to your brain on trauma. Like that old commercial, this is your brain on drugs. People don't get enough education. Like you will experience brain fog. You will disassociate more often than you think you do if you don't even know that word. You are going to have a hard time remembering things. You could read a paragraph 14 times and not know what the hell you just read. So it's normalizing what their experience, I think, is tremendous. I think it's important to share the message that you don't know who you are and you'd have to recreate yourself, because the old version of you is lost. That person is gone, and that is also normal. And so I think normalizing expectations of healing is a huge component of what I do. There's a lot of people that are like, I just want my trauma to go away. That's an unrealistic expectation, and you will always be stuck from healing if that's a requirement for you. So there's levels that you have to build upon with that. And the psychoeducation is a huge component of it. I also believe in normalizing, like, for example, a lot of people are like, I just feel numb, or I just want to stare at my TikTok all day, or I can't brush my teeth. And there are, unfortunately, a lot of therapists and even people, just their opinions, that will say, well, you need to just push on. You need to just do this. You need to get up and do that. No, you don't. You sometimes need to check out. You can't always live in your feelings. It's overwhelming. And that's what happens. And that's why we disassociate, because our brain says, I can't take it anymore. So I think that's the beginning stages, and everybody's story is different, and what their goals are is going to be different. And that's where it starts to become personalized care. And I think it's important to share, as far as what I bring to those situations, is I am a survivor, a two-time survivor of sexual assault. One was a date rape, and the other was interpartner violence in a
Mhm.
highly abusive relationship for 4 years. So I myself have experienced that and done 27 grueling months of therapy to heal from it. And sometimes my therapist gets a call because something happens and I'm in doo-doo land again emotionally, and I just need to process it with her. I have all, just because I have these skills and the education, I have to take that hat off when I'm experiencing it myself. Now I know
Yes,
my coping skills, but there are times I got to break it down and get her input. I need to talk to her. Every therapist has a therapist, at least they should, in my opinion, but a lot of us do. So I think that's also the draw to people. Is it's not about my story, it's about I'm sitting across from somebody that understands it and has survived it themselves. So that is a big draw for a lot of my clients, because they know
but
enough of my story to know that it's my history.
thank you for the transparency and sharing that,
Mhm.
because it does matter for people when they're trying to understand the person that they're speaking with, to
Mhm.
understand, is this theoretical that they're sharing, from what perspective? Yes, wanting to have that
Mhm.
professional training and knowledge, but there's a way to hold that space for someone when you understand what that space looks like.
And trust me, there's sessions where people cry. They don't talk a lot, but it's therapeutic for them because it's somebody that is holding that space. That's not a waste of a session. That's not being alone in your grief and in your despair. And it's in a safe space with somebody that you can talk it through should you decide to find some words. That happens.
Absolutely. I wrote so many notes, I'm not quite sure where to go with first. We've mentioned back and forth between a coach and someone that is a therapist, and you've talked about, just want to give a space to clearly define what a therapist is going to do versus what a coach is going to do. We kind of talked around it, but I just want to give them a
Yeah.
space to really have heard that spelled out.
Right. I think the biggest difference that people need to understand is that when I'm working with somebody, giving all of the coping skills and working through learning how to understand your triggers, identify your triggers, I can do all of the things that a therapist does except diagnose. Now, I can't do EMDR because I'm not licensed. So there's certain modalities I cannot provide, but I am not legally allowed to diagnose. And to be quite honest, I'm not mad about it, because I believe a lot of people, you ever hear how people use the language of I'm depressed, I'm schizophrenic? No, you have it. You don't say I'm cancer. So why do you say I'm depressed? When you internalize it and make it part of your identity, in not always, but a lot of instances, people allow it to define themselves, and now it becomes an excuse for my life, for what's not working, for why I'm failing, why I can't heal. So I also am very, very intentional with, you have depression, you have schizophrenia, or you say I live with it. I live with anxiety, severe, severe anxiety. That's going to be in my bucket for the rest of my life. I'm sure of it, because of trauma, because of grief, because of, you know, life is going to life us. So, learning the resiliency. So that is, to answer your question again, I don't diagnose. And that's the biggest differentiation. Because
Okay.
after you have a diagnosis with a mental health counselor, you're going in each week, you're talking, you're learning your triggers, you're learning your coping skills, you're being asked to do homework. All of those things I can do with you. I just don't provide diagnosis. Mhm.
You mentioned something where people have a requirement for their healing.
Mhm.
What possibly a list of unrealistic requirements people place on themselves to obtain their healing?
Probably the two most popular ones are assuming that once you do therapy that you will never be that you it's like wanting to erase their past. I guess that's a simpler way to put it. You can't change your past. So a lot of people find that they want to how they can get rid of it. It's not about getting rid of it. It's about understanding that this happened to you. I do function a lot. My first go-to is always person-centered humanistic approaches. But when it comes to working through things, I'm very much aligned with like acceptance and commitment therapy. And that doesn't mean you have to be okay with what happened to you. You just have to get to that place of like, it happened. So a lot of people fight that. And the second most common one is I need an apology from this person for the things they did to me. And when you have an abusive situation, it's not going to happen. When you have a deceased parent or relative or whoever it is that hurt you that is dead and you can't even physically have a conversation, but you demand that you need this apology and this person to admit what they did to you, you are keeping yourself in a victim mentality. And that's a hard truth for a lot of people to swallow. You do not require an apology to heal. You do have to accept the fact that it's happened and now learn how to move through it. And the third is like people think they will learn how to not have triggers. You're always going to have triggers. And the important component of that is learning how to move through them and not rip the face of the world apart when you're triggered. Because we don't walk around with warning signs like, I have PTSD, don't make these jokes around me, don't make a loud noise around me. That's not realistic. And a lot of people get angry at the world because they get triggered as if it's somebody else's problem. And it's not, it's a you problem. And that's another hard part to handle. So I would say those are probably the three biggest unrealistic expectations. And the fourth being when I hear, my therapist sucked, they didn't do anything for me. Oh, well, your therapist can't fix you because if they were magical, they could bop you on the head like, a fairy godmother and say you're healed and be done. And, I only know of one person that is capable of healing like that and doesn't live on this planet. So I've been told, if you're a faithful person. So there's a lot of anger that's involved with healing. And it's also being allowed to have your anger. I don't believe in cognitive reframing everything. So there's a lot of therapists that I've worked with. I'm only going to speak with my experience. So please, anybody listening, know that when I speak, it's from my experience. It's not a generalization. I've worked with several therapists who, if you are feeling negative, they're like, well, how can you change that to a positive thought? And that to me is completely invalidating and dehumanizing. Now, do you have to learn skills to like gratitude journaling to be intentional with your day to find positivity? Yes. But sometimes you got to be pissed. Sometimes you need to be angry. Sometimes you need to bawl your face off. And I'm not uncomfortable with those big emotions. And the other thing I don't let people do is apologize to me. Never apologize to me for what happens inside of a session. You don't have to apologize for your anger. You don't have to apologize for your sadness or for your silence. Like, that's not what you're here for. You're here to let that shit out. So let it out.
I
It
think
doesn't
our
make
society has not learned to be comfortable with all the emotions that we're issued with when we come into this world.
Mhm.
Anger has its place. It's not to be shown up all the time
Yeah.
and unhinged and you, as you said, attacking the world, but it has a place in your life to be able to express it. The
And anger
idea
is the
of
secondary emotion. It's not the true emotion. But
yeah,
sometimes I need to be angry because I can't cry today.
exactly. I often when you were talking about the cognitive reframing, the toxic positivity where people want everything just is not going to be right and it's okay.
Mhm.
Another thing that you mentioned that I wanted to that people struggle with, how to respond to bad advice when they are grieving.
I'm going to preface this with you have to be careful who you talk to when you're grieving. And when I lost my niece, I've always been the mediator in my family since I was young, since I was a teenager. I'm the one that can look at things objectively, not take sides, give that advice. Like I'm the 100-year-old, 16-year-old in my family. So when my niece passed away, it was very complicated dynamics wise. And I said to my therapist, I said, I don't know what to say to my family, but I cannot shoulder anybody else's grief. I cannot be the one people call because this was like losing a daughter to me. And I can't do it. And she recommended to me to get a grief buddy. She said, get a grief buddy. You find somebody that's not your family. And then you tell everybody in your family, find a grief buddy because I'm not it. And it was the best advice that she gave me. I had never even thought of that concept. So at the funeral, I had a friend with me that I said, if I give you that look, or if I say that word or squeeze your hand, it's time for me to go. And so it was very supportive and it happened. I think people mean well. A lot of toxic positivity, I think, comes from well-intentioned people not realizing it. And a lot of people don't know how to have empathy. And empathy is very different from sympathy. Sympathy is, I'm sorry you're hurting, that sucks. Like you acknowledge that they're going through it, but you don't really know how to sit with it. And a lot of people that lack empathy, it's not because they're psychopaths, it's because they don't know how to sit with their own pain. So how the hell am I supposed to sit with yours? Because it confronts their pain. So I caution who you speak to in grief. I caution who you speak to for advice. And that's on a non-professional level. And of course, do your homework naturally. But when people give bad advice, which we've all gotten, I just say, thank you. And I just keep it simple. Like, I'm not taking that to heart. I now know I'm not going to talk to you ever again because you're not able to show up in the way that I need. And the other thing that I really want to stress that I learned during my own grief and horrible suffering, because my abuse ended horribly before I got away. It was 2 weeks of hell. And then I got away from that. And then 6 months later, my niece passed away. So it was trauma on top of trauma. And I learned that when we are grieving, when we have trauma that we're processing, we can become very selfish. It's all about us. It's our pain and it's big pain. And so what I really recommend to people, this is with family, this is with friends, even if you're not in trauma and you have a bad day and you need to vent, ask permission. Because part of getting bad advice may be, maybe they're having a bad day and you didn't bother to say, hey, ... So what I encourage people to say is, I'm really having a tough day and I really need to talk this out. Do you have the space for that? Are you in a place that you can hear my and we have to be willing to let them say no, because that's true love and respect for somebody to say, you know what? I don't have it for you today, but I will absolutely make that for you tomorrow. And we have to respect that, because I personally had a friend that I told everything to, and I always called and was talking about myself, my trauma, my abuse, my abuser. And she one day just said to me, like, I'm so sick of this. And I love you, but you're selfish. You always talk about you. You never ask how I'm doing. And that was a hard pill to swallow, because I want to feel indignant and righteous about my situation, and that you're the person I talk to, and I'm allowed to feel these ways. That's true, but I'm not allowed and entitled to just dump it on somebody all the time. And that's hard when you're in those big grieving trauma crisis moments, to realize it's not all about me. Everyone else still has to live their life. And it's big for us to just assume we can drop that on somebody, family or not. So I really encourage people to ask permission to talk about big, heavy stuff. Or even if it's just, I had a shitty day and I want to bitch at you. Maybe we're not asking what they went through. So ask for it. Ask. I think it really builds trust and respect.
I like that.
Mhm.
You've used the word grief and trauma,
Mhm.
sometimes together and sometimes separate. What should someone take away when they hear you use those words?
Well, there's a lot of grief wrapped up in trauma. But when I think about grief, I think death, I think loss. And then that's usually tied in with trauma, because somebody could have died in a traumatic way. Somebody could have died instantly. And there's a big difference between somebody dying from a sickness and you get to wrap your head around it and you get to have some closure and say, I love you and goodbye, and this sucks, and cry with that person, and getting a phone call that this person's gone or this person's kidnapped, or we can't find them, or. So they're very closely related. But oftentimes when you hear people speak about grief, it usually has to do with death and loss of some sort. And then when you have trauma, the thing with trauma is what I define as trauma is going to be different from what somebody else might define. And I use this example when I try to explain it, is a car accident. Say there's 5 of us in there in this car accident. We all break out of it alive. So the first person might be like, shoot, glad I'm alive. Life is good. God is great. No trauma whatsoever. They're cool. To the last person, that might be like, I can't get in a car. This was horrifying and traumatizing to me. I can't even think about leaving my house right now. Like, we don't know. So trauma is a compilation for some people. And if you've never worked through your previous things and you don't have the coping skills and you haven't learned the resiliency and you can't go, shit, I've been through some hard times. I know I got this. It gets more complicated. So trauma, I can't tell you what, I have no right. Nobody gets to tell you something wasn't traumatic. Just because it wouldn't be traumatic for me does not mean that you perceived it as trauma. So that's important to understand as well. A lot of people want to tell you this is or is not trauma, and that's crap, because it's the same thing with somebody who has schizophrenia. The voices in their head are not real to me, but I can't tell them it's not real because they live with voices in their head. So it is real to them. It's the same type of thing.
Exactly. Thank you, because I think people sell short their grief experience and really trying to understand it. The idea of the grief fog, the grief brain, knowing that
Yes.
it's traumatic and
Mhm.
what those things do to the brain
Mhm.
and how that impacts. It is more than this person is no longer here. There are so many different layers to it, and it's unique for each person because it was a unique individual that remained living and a unique person that transitioned from this world. So being able to process all that is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Do you find people struggle with regret or guilt in their grief? And what are some things people to do with that?
Ooh, there's usually guilt wrapped up in grief, and it's going to depend on the relationship dynamic of that person. So, like when my niece passed, there was a lot of guilt that her mother experienced for the tumultuous relationship they had, that she didn't have a lot of time to write certain things. And so, her experience with grief was very different from mine, because mine wasn't wrapped up in guilt. So it does happen a lot. And that's going to very much be case by case. And then there's sometimes just the people that are like, I didn't say I love you. And it like turns into a huge thing for them. I should have said I loved you, you know? And then those are the things that you just have to help them through, help them understand. Like, I believe that grief brings twisted gifts. And one of the gifts that you give yourself is healing. I firmly believe that. So, again, from my own experience, when my niece passed away, we had a very vivid conversation. And towards the end, a few days before she passed, and she said, I know you're going to be sad, and that's fine, but I don't want you to be sad forever. You get to live, and I don't. I don't get to raise my son. He gets to exist in this world with you. So even on the crappiest day that I'm having, I don't push away my feelings because then that's invalidating myself and that's not acceptable. But I do feel my crap. And the gift that she gave me with that is don't unpack your suitcase and live in your crap. So it gave me perspective to go, you know what? Allura would give anything to have my crappy day right now because she'd be breathing. So we give ourselves these gifts. And I think I use the phrase twisted gift a lot. And I think that trauma and grief and crisis and loss and all of the big, heavy things, when we choose healing, we give ourselves a gift. And I think when we're dealing with grief, I firmly believe that the people that we lost would not want us to sit on this earth miserable and alone and just not living anymore because they're gone. Is that part of the process? Absolutely. In the beginning. But you have to give them, I believe in honoring life because they didn't get to. They got taken.
That is some really good advice there. Thank you for sharing that. You talked about research and you talked about trying to find the right person.
Mhm.
What is good education or what is a solid background look like what does good look like versus what does not good look like when I'm searching for a therapist or searching for a coach?
The hard part is you can't anybody on paper can look great, but what's the vibe? So here's something. If if you go to psychology.com, you can filter through. You can put in, I want a female or a male therapist. This is where I live. This is my insurance company. And then it'll sort it out for you, for example. So you can see pictures and you can read a bio. And in my opinion, some therapists are going to hate that I'm going to say this, but if somebody says I'm a CBT therapist, keep it moving. Everybody's CBT. It's cognitive behavioral therapy. Every aspect of therapy has to do cognitively with our brains. So that's always going to be at the root. So to me, that's like the lazy theory. Like, I do CBT. No shit. You're a therapist. You're working with the brain. You're healing the brain. You're teaching the brain new things. That to me would be like a red flag. But the gift is on the positive side of that. And most of them aren't going to be like, I'm only a CBT therapist. They will tell you the modalities, the theories that they work behind. So they may do acceptance and commitment. They may be EMDR certified, which is a somatic trauma therapy. And so if you've got significant trauma and you at some point want to do EMDR, then you'll be able to see that that person has that extended certification. If you have sexual abuse, domestic violence, you might want somebody, and I can't remember it. So it's like certified sexual addictions and trauma or something along those lines. It's a CSAT. That's a very specific certification and one that I will be getting when I can, once I'm have my master's, to work with people with sexual assault, with domestic violence. Because a lot of times that is actually human addiction. That trauma bond creates an addiction to a person. And then you can form addictive behaviors because of that, for example. So you will get to see their certifications. And sometimes they'll say, I work with ages 5 to 17. Other people will say, I work with 18 and up. They will tell you the specific demographic because some people are like, hey, I work with anxiety, depression, and personality disorders. Probably want to keep moving if that's where they've segmented off. That's cool, but it's great that they tell you that. So it's not that I don't believe something's good or bad. It's, do you have what I need? And a lot of people they're knowledgeable about the different modalities out there to help with trauma or, domestic violence and things like that. If you have somebody that works with anxiety and depression, they may not be the one you want to talk to about domestic violence because that's a whole segmented thing. There are grief therapists out there, the same way that there's gender affirming therapists. So you need to know what it is that you need help with, and then you can read the bios. But then now I need to talk to you. And if a therapist isn't willing to have a discovery call or have a conversation with you or have some places in there, to me, like, how do you know? How do I know I want to invest my time with you? So make sure that now sometimes people just come highly recommended. I never spoke to my therapist before I met her, but she was CSAT certified. She is specified. Betrayal trauma was one of her areas, addiction, porn addiction, and things like that. So she came highly recommended, and I can see why after working with her all these times. I wish she could be my mentor, but she can't because we already have this relationship. So
Right.
maybe not good or bad, but it's, do they have what I need?
Okay. You mentioned the word modality. What does that mean?
Modality is going to be like how they work. So there's talk therapy. That's one modality. There's dialectical behavioral therapy. So a lot of, like, say if you live with borderline personality disorder, they're going to use DBT skills, which are going to be different from somebody who needs grief and loss. And that might be more of like the acceptance and commitment theory. So there you have all these theories, or you have Adler or Gestalt, like, I don't know if you ever saw Clint Eastwood, but he did this whole thing on a stage one time with an empty chair. And that's a modality. So sometimes people have especially with let's just say women who are raped or men who are raped, and they have a hard time saying those words. How can you, if you can't say I was raped, and a lot of them can't, you'd be surprised. I need you to practice saying that out loud. So I want you to talk to this chair. Say you have a deceased parent that you have a lot of anger with. You might use that modality and be like, your mom's sitting in this chair. I want you to say everything you need to say to her. That's one modality. Or I might say, I need you to write a letter to your abuser and then bring it and read it to me. So it's the modalities are different types of way that the theoretical approaches are going to be put into action.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Trauma bond. What is
Mm.
that?
It's like Stockholm syndrome, Beauty and the Beast. I had this huge epiphany. I was like, how fascinating that that's my favorite Disney movie. When it's somebody who captures the father, then trades for the daughter. She's held captive. And now all of a sudden, we're going to have a love story based out of it right there. So
Wow.
you take that into the girls that are kidnapped when they're 7, 8, 9. They have 3 babies by their captor. They don't want to be out in the real world because suddenly they believe that they're in love with this person. But now you've aged out and you're too old for his preference. And now what? That's a trauma bond. When you are in a highly abusive relationship, it creates a trauma bond. When you're dealing with narcissistic people, it creates a trauma bond. And what happens is Prince Charming comes in, they're everything you want and need. You get the love bombing, you get all of the, oh my God. And you've probably told them all of your traumas and all of the things that have been bad because they're so trusting. And oh my God, I've never met anybody like this in my life. But what you just did was you gave them all the clues how to be Captain Save-A-Ho. And now they've got what they want. And it's so great and amazing. It's like being high on a drug. And then all of a sudden it starts to shift. You get punched, you get beat, you get starved, you get hit, they rob your bank account, whatever the abuse is. And this cycle goes from high to low, high to low. And it's like drug addiction, and it creates a trauma bond, and it creates like, that's why it's so hard to get out of it, because as soon as you say I'm done, Prince Charming shows back up, or Princess Charming. There's a lot of narcissistic females. That's just not talked about a lot. And all of a sudden, they're that person, and that love and that euphoria comes, and that creates a trauma bond, like a needle to a vein. And it's very hard to break.
So if I find you on TikTok hanging out, what can I expect to see there?
A lot. A little bit of everything. I really try to be a person, like, and I will tell anybody that before I'm a coach, before I become a licensed therapist, before I'm a consultant, I'm Britany and I'm a human. So if you come to my TikTok, you might see a goofy ass video. You might see me duet something that's completely dirty and inappropriate and hilarious. It's not specifically for, I want people to get a vibe for me. And that is honestly the number one way. Between that and my Instagram is how people mostly find me. And they're like, you just are such a person. I get a feel for you, and I can tell that you're authentic and you've shared enough of your story to understand that I think I'm safe to work with you. So you're going to see me in a towel with no fake eyelashes on, and my eyebrows aren't drawn on, and I'm talking to you because I wanted to say something, and you might see me looking really fabulous on a different day. You're going to get some mental health tips. You're going to get some, what the did I just read and see today? I'm a swearer, so you're going to get the authentic me. You're going to get a little mix of it all, because I'm a human being, and first and foremost, I'm always that.
Thank you. I appreciate this conversation, and I thank you for the widowhood. When we talked about having this discussion, you were thinking about it. Were there other things that you wanted to cover that we haven't crossed already?
I don't think so. I mean, if people have more questions, you got all the info on how to reach me. I don't really necessarily feel like I need to share my grief story, but even that, was tremendous. And I know that that's kind of your forte. And so, it's just, I think information is great. I think networking is great. Connections are great. And even I want people to understand, like, even if you're like, I think I need more than what you can offer, but I don't know how to start. It's not offensive to me to say, hey, I'm not here to work with you, but can you help me figure something out? Can you help me find this or that? You got it. That's not offensive to me.
Very
Sometimes they
good.
just need that support.
Well, thank you. I will let you close out this conversation, talk to the audience, and wrap this up however you feel free.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for having me on here. I think it's a great opportunity to meet and to reach new audiences. And I really, I'm a huge advocate of self-compassion. And like when I sit and think about even talking about this, I'm getting teary in my eyes. Like, we don't hold enough compassion for ourselves. We can talk so kindly to our friends and to our family. It's very hard to do that for ourselves. And so I constantly remind people of the quote that I kind of came up with is, you can't win if you're not on your own team. And what I mean by that is self-compassion. And some days it's hard to love ourselves. And I don't believe that we have to love ourselves before anyone else can love us, because sometimes through grief and trauma, we don't know how to love ourselves and we have to rely on other people's love. So I guess what I would recommend to anybody that's going through it, which is pretty much all of us, is to be compassionate, to hold space for your healing and for your pain, and to be choosy with who you share that with. Brene Brown, a lot of people know who she is, PhD psychologist, talks about shame. She says, everyone has a story. And if you're listening carefully, it'll bring you to your knees. But not everybody earns the right to hear that story. And I think that that's very important, especially when we're seeking to heal, is people can create more stress for us. So understanding who is safe to speak to. She also talks about her acronym BRAVING, and that V in there is vault. And I think it's very important and we should normalize the saying of, it's not my story to tell. So I hope and pray that people listening, if they have questions, feel free to reach out. But if not, and you hear this and you learn something from it, or if this is the only piece, is hold compassion for yourself. Speak to yourself kindly, because you have to. Not everyone else will do it for us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. This definitely value added to the community.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for spending another episode with Widowhood Real Talk. If you found the contents of today helpful, share the episode to anyone you know who may need it. Subscribe to the show and tune into Widowhood Real Talk each week. Then visit widowhood-realtalkwithtina.org to join the community and access additional resources. Remember, you are not alone in this journey.